Okay, so welcome back. We are here now to create an Nginx container that will host our first Docker container web app. All right, so we're going to keep the web app on the simple side, very simple side. So the first thing that we're going to start off doing is creating a directory. So I will do this along with you. So I've got an example here already, but I'm going to do it this way. So Nginx web app. All right. So CD into Nginx web app. Okay, so the first thing we need whenever we are ready to deploy would be our web app. So quickly we'll go in and we'll make a very simple HTML web page. So HTML, body. Okay, and then we will just put in a quick header. So our first awesome web app. All right. Okay, so we've developed our first web app here. The next thing we need, so since we are going to be deploying this via Nginx, you will want an Nginx config. All right, so you can either do this, there's a lot of different ways you could create the config. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a separate file where we can manage it, and that way if we need any, ever in the future you would need any custom settings, you have the ability to quickly add and update them, and then those settings are also in version control, so it's sort of a part of your source code. So it's very convenient for future maintenance. All right, so what we'll want to do is we'll want to create a root, and what I'm going to do is create the root directory of www, and that will be where we'll store all of our web app files. All right, so I will save that. So clear ls. All right, so now we've got our Nginx config, we've got our web app. So the next thing to do is our Docker file. All right, so remember, our Docker file is our blueprints for creating our image, and then we'll take our created image and we're going to run that. And so when we run it, that image will now run a web app server so that we can go and access the front end from a browser. All right, so remember, the first thing for any Docker file is our from instruction, and the argument will be our base container, or our base image. So our base image, in this case, I'm going to use Nginx latest. So you could go a different route. Instead of using an image that already has Nginx installed on it, you could go with the route of installing it yourself and basically going through all the motions that you would go through when creating a virtual machine. You'd script out all the commands. We'll do that a little more later, but I'll just to give you an idea of some alternatives that you could take. So if you really wanted to have an Ubuntu container, and you want to install Nginx on that Ubuntu container, you could do that if you so desired. All right, so from Nginx latest, so the next thing we need to do is we need to add our source information. So the easiest way to do that is to use the add command. So we're going to add webapp.html, and we're going to add that to www/. All right, so now we'll copy that file name over into www. All right, and there's another command we could use here. You could also use what's called copy, and the difference between add and copy is pretty simple. So add allows for URLs, so you could do something like test.com/ webapp.html. If this file was out on the internet somewhere to be downloaded. The other thing you can do is with add, the other thing that it will do is if you're adding something like a tar or a zip file, so like test.zip, it will actually decompress it on the on the copy. So it will copy the file over and then actually decompress it in the directory, in the destination directory. So you'd eventually, once in the container, you'd see something like test with all of the decompressed files instead of test.zip. Whereas copy is a much simpler. It will only do files, local files, I believe, on your system, and it doesn't do any type of decompression. So it's a more limited version of add, or add is a enhanced version of copy, however you'd like to look at it. Okay, so the next thing we want to add is our nginx config that we created. So nginx config, and if you have any experience with nginx, so the nginx configuration is always in etc slash nginx slash confd slash and then I always just replace the default.conf with it, so that way we know it will be used. Okay, so what we've done so far is we've added the web app to a new directory, www. So this add command, I believe, also creates this directory if it doesn't exist. All right, and then we've added the nginx config and overwritten the default config file that currently will exist in this nginx in this nginx base image. Okay, so if we weren't using a base image, what we would want to now do is we need to expose the ports of this container. So again, it's just like, you're basically writing the building blocks for almost like what you would think of as like a VM. So instead of having to go to the IP tables and edit that config, Dockerfile does something called expose. So it's another instruction, and it takes in one argument, and it's a port. So our port being 80 is the default nginx configured port, as well as 443 for HTTPS. Okay, so and then we would want to have a command. So this command is what runs on startup. So this command, I think it's nginx, and then it's like forgotten. Let's see, daemon off, I believe. And then, no, semicolon. I think that's it. I have this saved in another file here, so let's look and make sure. Okay, that's what it is. Let us copy that. Okay, so ignore this one. All right. So nginx g daemon off. So this is just the standard nginx startup command. All right. So if we weren't using the nginx base container, we would definitely have to do these things here. We would need to explicitly expose the 80 and explicitly expose 443 and explicitly command the nginx nginx application to start off. But because we're using this nginx base image, we don't have to do any of this because it already actually includes all of that information. And that's sort of the benefit of using a well-maintained and pre-existing image, is often a lot of the common things that you would need to do, they sort of try and take care of for you to make it easier. So instead of being, instead of 3 extra lines to this Docker file, we actually only needed to add in a config file and our source. And so it makes it a lot easier for later maintenance. You don't have to worry about as much. I only really recommend using images that you definitely trust. And another tip is to make sure that they are not only is it a trustworthy company, but that it's a maintained image. So you even the big companies will create an image and then not support it anymore. And so you may be having your image may have like an out of date software installed on it, so which could possibly lead to security vulnerabilities and whatnot. So it's always good to know what you're running, and as long as you're using something that you are 100% trusting of, then I recommend trying to reuse as much as possible. Why reinvent the wheel when you have a Docker Hub out there to help you out? So, but I try to stay away from any type of straight up community images from individuals. I usually just leverage whatever their Docker files are that they've used to create their images on Docker Hub, and reuse those just because you never know what they could have done or would be doing in the Docker file. There could be malicious content or out of date software in their Docker file. So it's better to go through those rather than just trusting those images. Okay, sorry, that was a little more than probably needed to be said. All right, so we've created our Docker file now. So the next thing we need to do is build our Docker image. So remember our Docker build command, we're going to use that again here. So remember Docker build and then our path to our Docker file, which is in our current directory. And then we are going to create a tag, which is going to be web app, and we'll do James, I guess. Web app hyphen James. And we'll explicitly say latest. All right. So it's going to build it. And if I didn't already have Nginx on my local, then it would do a pull, but I actually already have the latest Nginx version on here. So it runs that. It runs the web app. So it's copying this file into the image, into this directory, and then it's also overriding this file if it were to exist with this file. And we've successfully created it. So next thing we need to do is Docker run. So if you remember our Docker run command from our hello world, it's going to be pretty similar to that, but there are going to be some differences. So I'm going to just run web app James just as a point. Ooh. Here you go. So our Docker file actually failed. So my bad. I accidentally must have screwed up the Nginx config here. So let's look at that. Ah, yes, look here. We have forgotten the all-important semicolon. How is Nginx to know that this is the end of the line? Okay, so now that we have successfully created our Nginx file, a valid Nginx file, we will rebuild. And if you saw how it hesitated there, every time something is reused, it tries to reuse the cache for performance reasons. And anytime you change a layer, it's going to change every layer after that. So that was a good learning lesson anyways, I guess. So here the pause was because it's re-adding this new Nginx config file because it didn't match the previous one. Okay, so now if I do the same thing as before, web app James. Okay, so now you see that it's just running, and it's just running, and it's running, and it's running, and nothing's happening. Like it's just ongoing. So if I were to duplicate my tab, let's see, restart or duplicate root. Okay. Oh, okay. Docker machine SSH default. All right. Give that a second. So it may not look like this container is still, it looks like it sort of just froze, like nothing's happening here. But it's because Nginx doesn't, as a default, print out any logs to the console. So if we were to actually log into another, like a SSH into this VirtualBox again, which I've done here, and we do a Docker PS, you can see that it's actually running right here. Web app James, all right, nostalgic Brahmagupta right here. Okay? So if I go back and I close this, all right, little heart, I guess, because I did a Control C. All right, and now I do a Docker PS again. It's now gone. So we've closed it now. So that's what's happening. And how are we going to access the HTML there? So another issue with just running a Docker run is there's no way to map the port. So we need to add in a couple things here to make this container run. So we want to add something in here to make the container run in the background, and we want to add something to this command where we're mapping the ports of the container. So I'll let you try and figure that out, and I'll come back and show you exactly how to do that.